This video is one of those I'm very excited about, and I know going in that like I feel crazy but I know I'm not. If you've clicked on this video, that tells me you've read the thumbnail, the description about what it's about. I don't know how long this one's going to be. How did we get here? I'm starting to think I need to create a playlist on my twin flame videos because, again, this twin flame topic is so triggering. And that's why I've done these videos, to heal the twin flame karma around the terminology and all these things that we've been told that are starting to feel unreliable. Because what it does is that it then causes us to throw the baby out with the bathwater. And that's been me, except I've refused to throw the baby out with the bathwater. And I've struggled. I've struggled with this. At the same time, I've had this irritation that I experience. All these great readers guiding us, sharing their readings generously, starting to tiptoe around the terminology. This is what was starting to get to me. In the background, I have my own journey through these soulmate waters. And I've made many observations through my dreams, through, physical life, all these things. And I found this terminology limiting. I found it limiting to the point where I literally discarded the term twin flame. I just threw it out and I was like, you know what? Soulmate sounds better to me. I don't need to worry about whether this is a twin flame or not. Doesn't matter. But then the result of that is that we lose all of the information that applies to the twin flame, because we know there's a twin flame collective. We know that it's a journey that takes you through like this hectic expansion as a spiritual being towards your life purpose, the expansion of your consciousness. It's very expanding. And so we know that when someone mentions the twin flame collective, you kind of can plot yourself somewhere in there. Where I've started to have a problem is where we start to talk about false twin flames. Like, what is that? False twin flame. I know what it is. I believe it refers to the twin flame you thought was your twin flame. But when you realize that you have toxic traits that attracted you to that twin flame, let's call them false. I rejected that. It took me a while to reject it, and I didn't understand why I had rejected it, but I rejected it because whatever that flame was still in my midst. Yet, there was also a new one. A healthier seeming one I didn't feel quite worthy of. Let's put it that way. And so I had these two flames in my psychic space. Last week I watched a video by Gabby Kovalenko, that woman. Maybe I have a slight crush on her, but Gabby, I think it's an old video. Let me find the name. It's called How to Tell If It's a Twin Flame Relationship, the Key Signs and Lessons. So I'm not going to go deep into this video, but it was within like the first minute that I realized that these two individuals where I'd keep like trying to change the terminology around them, what role they play, that they both feature on this twin flame journey. So I'm not going to go into the video and unpack how Gabby defines this, because ultimately I watched that video to gain a better understanding of my own journey, and I'm now beginning to expand on the understanding of this journey. My main takeouts out of that were, for me, the psychic connection, the feeling of homeness, the sense of familiarity, and the way in which this relationship can change me, can shift me fundamentally. The idea of this twin flame term, I've found that it over-identifies with one individual to the point where we attach to this idea of the ultimate coming together with us, when actually this person featuring in your space is there to provide a corresponding flame that has the ability to burn things away from you, to bring you into union with yourself, with your ideal self. I can see that now because that flame feels like a flicker right now. It feels like it's running out, if not has run out of oxygen. At the same time, the second encounter, the second person I encountered in my psychic realm, there was a flame, but the flame was not to the same degree as the first one. And I believe the first one's role was to burn away so much of the toxicity that was in me. My sense of self-worth, but also it shared a flame with me in that it sparked a passion for myself that I never had before that. So it shifted me. It shifted me forever. It also made me aware of how psychic I am. That has changed me forever. The second one made me aware of how unworthy I felt. It brought forward an awareness that there's a certain partner that I will not see myself with in this lifetime if I can't bridge the gap in terms of where I see myself and where I see them. A flame burned for some time. And like I said, the flame was not a raging fire like the first one, but it was still a fire. It felt more controlled. But because of that, one of the things that the first flame did, let's call it that, them. Let's call them that. Let's call them the first flame. The first flame was a raging fire. Now, the level to which a fire burns depends on how much fuel there is. At that point in my life, there was a lot to be burned away. They woke me up to my psychic ability. However, a raging fire can bring a lot of confusion and chaos. And so I started working my way through that, discovering what unconditional love is. And that I discovered through distancing myself physically, accepting their wounds, accepting my own wounds, and treating them with compassion. Treating them with compassion and treating myself with compassion. The second flame, the one that didn't burn so violently, so aggressively, felt more balanced, felt more peaceful. Again, both of these flames, the majority of it, played out in the dream world as well. That's why I'm able to validate both of these relationships, because these flames burned for me. I saw myself in them. I felt familiar about them. In terms of my psychic ability, being in that raging fire confused me. I couldn't stabilize how I related to my intuition. However, the second flame, there wasn't enough physical interaction for me to lean on to validate my psychic knowing. And through that calm flame, my psychic ability balanced itself out. I started to feel confirmed that something does not have to be confirmed externally for me to know it's real. And so the second flame balanced out my psychic ability. Both very necessary. Now I'm going to step away a bit from these two flames to explain how I came to this idea of a soul flame, and also why I found myself crying yesterday every time the term twin flame came up, and it was coming up inside of me. Very confusing day yesterday. I mean, I don't think I've ever pulled that many cards. And I felt like I was rummaging through the cards, looking for something that might not be there, but I know it's there. And this thing for me felt like a theory. It was taking me back to the movie A Beautiful Mind, because that movie came up. I'll share a playlist on this twin flame stuff because it's been developing. And like I said yesterday, I said I don't know what's going to happen next, but I knew that I had to post yesterday's video for this whole thing to develop further. But what was confusing me is that all the downloads I was getting, I knew they were all valid, but I couldn't figure out how they fitted in. I had these words coming through me. I had twin flame coming in. I had, there is no twin flame. I had, it's a soul flame journey. I had all these conflicting terms and ideas coming at me, and I was grieving one of them. I was grieving that. And the only understanding that I could draw from this was that the confusion comes from over-identifying with one person being the twin flame, because it invalidates the others that don't have as much fuel to burn in your life. I feel this is limiting because as we expand, if we are too attached to one version of an individual or one individual, yes, they evolve as well. They evolve. Perhaps not at the same speed or rate as you, but they do evolve because they're also changed. They're also changed. But at some point, let me use my own story. At some point, I reached a level where I realized that I'll be holding my own journey back if I wait for this one person, flame number 2, to come around. Their fear of what people may think, their fear of how I show up, perhaps psychically, those fears, they may never overcome them. Or they may overcome them when I've drifted too far beyond the graph. So here's the thing. The graph came up because of A Beautiful Mind. In the movie A Beautiful Mind, John Nash is the main character. He's played by Russell Crowe. This is based on a true story, but not the whole movie is actually true, these movies. But John Nash arrives at Princeton and he becomes obsessed with coming up with an original theory. He has to come up with an original theory. Everyone else has done all these amazing things and written all these papers, and he's frustrated because he must succeed. He feels he must succeed. There's a whole thing that happens in the background in terms of his hallucinations, but I'm not there for that right now. One night, he's with his fellows in a bar, and a group of women walk in. And they're all like strategizing about who's going to get the best one because they've picked which one's the top one. And the guys come up with their theories, and something one of his friends says sparks an epiphany for him, which he then takes to go and develop the game theory. So there was already a game theory. Game theory is a mathematical theory that brings some kind of knowledge and understanding to behavioral dynamics. What modern game theory did, this is John Nash's theory, what modern game theory did was that it brought this understanding and knowledge of how behavioral dynamics work when you have multiple players in a game, whether this game is amongst animals, humans, or whatever. Because that's why everyone thought he was crazy at university. He was there, everyone's like having drinks and having lunch, and he's got his piece of paper and he's busy like writing vehemently and like visualizing stuff, watching birds fighting over breadcrumbs. So he believed that he was going to be able to develop some kind of theory based on how nature operates behaviorally when something needs to get got. So that's, in layman's terms, modern game theory. It then went on to be applied to computer science, all these other things. So I went on a sort of a rabbit hole. In one of my twin flame videos, I went in to describe the physics of lightning and thunder as they apply to union. Because essentially, on this twin flame journey, what we seek is union with our truest selves, our highest potential. This is bearing in mind that we are electromagnetic beings, In order to grow and understand ourselves, especially if we don't want to over-idealize and over-attach to another human and their limits. Science can really help us. Science, maths, physics can really help us to understand what's going on here. The information is already there. If we want to know how to become more magnetic, if we want to know how to activate ourselves, if we want to know how to find our way around, we can apply physics to this journey. This morning, when I woke up, I came across 2 comments to my Healing Twin Flame Karma video. That's what it's called. The comment said, "I think you may understand electricity better than a lot of the electricians I know, by the way. Very well done." Okay, so I laughed at this because, I did Google it. I got my Google on, but the physics is beyond me to an extent. I just took what I needed. And again, this was sparked by the reading that I did. The secret is out. I keep going back to that, but I go back to it because there's a depth of energy in that reading that I felt that told me that that reading is very important, that told me that that reading has many clues. So that reading has become like me watching the birds and trying to come up with a theory about who's going to get the breadcrumb and how. That's how that's been feeling. He then says, this is Ian Kenny, he then says, "By the way, as an electrician, I like to envision the energy within and without me to be of the alternating current type. I like for it to always be seeming to move and change directions unpredictably, while at the same time staying eternally the same in its true nature, but always growing and becoming richer as an individual." When I read this, I felt like John Nash in the bar. I felt like everyone's talking about how to get the girl, but that I just cracked some huge theory that can change the world. That's how I felt when I read this, because this completely validated what I was actually seeing about this journey. That I'm on this graph, and I looked at these mathematics graphs, the economics graphs with like supply and demand and equilibrium and price versus value. I think it is. What's the other X and Y? I'm going to paste it here. Price versus quantity. Quantity on the X axis and price on the Y axis. And then, and I was starting to see this graph coming together. But then the graph wasn't like, it was speaking to me in terms of, again, behavioral dynamics, because I'm trying to understand why we behave this way on the twin flame journey. I'm trying to understand it all. The chaos, the order, the principles. I'm like, it's like there. And that's how I felt even when I was with all my cards. I had like 2 Celtic crosses in front of me, one of the masculine, one of the feminine, and I actually just called them straight up twin flames. And I was seeing stuff, but I couldn't, the sense was not coming to me. It was too chaotic yesterday. But when I see this graph, and to be honest, I do see the game theory at play, but I'm no mathematician, I'm no scientist here. I'm letting my intuition lead me. And it's being confirmed along the way, the breadcrumbs are breadcrumbing. But, in the sense of Hansel and Gretel, not in the sense of being breadcrumbed, okay? So I'm looking at this graph and I'm trying to plot where these twin flames would meet on this graph. But I'm realizing that one line of supply and demand, it was not fitting. Rather, this graph needs what I'm showing you now, this wavelength thing with the frequency. So like where you find yourself on this range, on the wave, tells you what frequency you're on. And this thing it's basically what a vibration looks like. This is starting to feel like that Return of Christ video where I felt like I needed someone who understands the Bible to help me. Here, I feel like I need someone who understands maths and physics to help me. And I don't know whether people that sensible find themselves on the twin flame journey. But when you look at the wavelength, graph, it shows you that if you are not on the same wavelength, you won't find each other. So somehow we can find a way to plot ourselves on a graph like this. Things like worthiness, a sense of peace, how healed we are, how healed we feel, are things that plot you at a certain point in this place. This is what brings us out of balance with our flame. And this is also how we drift apart. When one person is too far out, let's say, on a different wavelength to the other. And so you almost lose your connection to that radio frequency. This is another term that came up, radio frequency. I looked it up. It says, radio frequency is the rate at which an alternating electric current or voltage oscillates and is part of the electromagnetic energy spectrum. Okay, so these are big words here, but the word oscillates got me because one of the keywords that I wrote down yesterday in my downloads was pendulum. Pendulum. What is a pendulum? A pendulum is a body suspended from a fixed point so as to swing freely to and fro under the action of gravity and commonly used to regulate movements, as of clockwork. Okay, so now this starts to talk about time. This pendulum swings back and forth, and what we know about a pendulum, you know, when they say the pendulum has swung, what determines when it swings? What determines when it swings? Because I felt it swing yesterday, and that's what was bringing my tears. I felt it swing. And what needs to happen here is that we need to remove time as we see it in terms of how humans deal with time, because the wavelength that you're on determines how quickly you can jump a timeline. If you can jump a timeline and your counterpart is unable to jump that timeline, boom, you're no longer in the same range on the graph. Grief. That's where the grief comes in. I looked up pendulum and time, and it says pendulums are used to regulate time because their period, or the time it takes to complete a full oscillation, is constant. And so I believe, again, on this range, constant needs to be looked at in relation to wavelengths. And this is also very interesting for me, this idea around radio frequency, because, you know, that's how I receive information. It's like there's a radio inside of me. And I've looked up, you know, how radios work and all that. Psychic people are radios. We're radios. So music can play on that radio. Words can be heard on the radio. You hear your ear going bzzz, tuning into a frequency. That's what happens. We are electromagnetic beings. And I believe that's exactly when the pendulum swings, is when we are jumping a timeline. And unfortunately, in jumping that timeline, in expanding, in furthering your prospects and furthering your horizon, you end up grieving a twin flame. And you might end up embarking on a journey as a soul flame. A journey where you're no longer attached to another person, to the idea of being with another person, but rather one that prioritizes the pursuit of the highest version of yourself, the one you are most passionate about, and to figure out how to become that person, to figure out how to bridge that gap between your current version and that version. And also in the same space, a new role, a new place is born for a counterpart to travel through life with. This idea that someone has to be as psychic as you and as knowledgeable as you in terms of the field you're passionate about is no longer fixed in your idea of what life looks like or needs to look like. More physical needs can be satisfied by a being, a person that feels real, that feels physical, that can be a companion, that is balanced, that is peaceful, and that can be your companion in this physical life and holds a respect for the depths that you are able to travel to. I believe this is what it means to be a mermaid. I believe this is what it means to be a mermaid, because the mermaid also visited me yesterday. I very much identify as a mermaid. When I look at this wavelength, I also see waves of water. When I look at the depths one can reach, when you look at underwater animals, there are animals, I believe, that live closer to the surface, and there are those that live at the depths of the water. These various animals, while they have a relationship because they all exist in the ocean, they may not become mates or part of like any living system together, physical living system together, because they basically exist at different wavelengths. Even a whale's voice, a whale's sound takes so much longer to travel. There are humans that can hear the sound of whales, they are. But not all of us can hear the sound of a whale. It's language, but perhaps that's what a mermaid is. A mermaid knows how to hear the sound of a whale, to understand its language, but can also sit on the shore, watching how life works for humans, watching how life works above the water. When they're above the water, they miss being in the water, but when they're in the water, they long to be on land. I believe that's what being a mermaid is. And maybe when a mermaid comes into relationship with a human, perhaps only that human understands the mermaid's language and understands that there is some stuff they won't understand about the mermaid because they don't live underwater, but they're able to coexist because there is a part of the human, the land human, that has a longing for the language of water. And so, to sum up this theory of mine, which I find myself very comfortable in now, I find myself at peace. Does the twin flame journey exist? Yes. Is there one real twin flame? No. Is the twin one person? No. The twin is the version of yourself mirrored back to you at that certain wavelength, based on your needs, based on the needs of your soul's growth and expansion, based on the needs of the expansion of your consciousness. Is one soulmate or twin flame more important than the other? Well, that's dependent on your appetite for growth and expansion. Will you ever end up with your twin flame? Perhaps. However, that would require that you both jump timelines and end up on the same wavelength at the same time, on the human clock. And to over-identify with this ideal would actually defeat the means by which you can jump timelines. In order to jump a timeline, you have to be willing to release everything that exists in the current one. That's how we go through these deaths, why we go through these deaths and rebirths. We have to be willing to die, to wake up somewhere new. This matches, with these theories around rewiring your beliefs, all of that. We work with the heart, we work with the mind, but ultimately, if your mind is stuck in a certain way of thinking, in a certain belief system, that limits your growth. And that's why I move so carefully and I speak so passionately around how we use words. Because words, when we're not careful with them, can trap us. But we are grateful for words because words are able to teach us. If we use them for what they were created for, they're able to teach us and guide us. And quite simply, I was able to gain clarity on this theory of mine through the words twin and flame. And so now, whenever I read this definition of a twin flame, I see the word twin as a mirror. In looking into the mirror, I need to not forget or discount the fact that the version of myself is what will be mirrored back to me. That version in time. In order to progress on the journey, I need to detach from the old version of myself, meaning I need to detach from the flame at the time in order to experience more growth. And so if I look at myself in the mirror tomorrow, it is possible to see something else reflected back to me in that mirror. I believe in union. I believe that there is a time where when I look at myself in the mirror, I will be able to see the highest potential version of myself and start to work through what is missing for me to achieve that version of myself. Yes, how long is a piece of string? But I think that's why there does come a time where that idea of uniting with that flame dies, where you can no longer see it because you're on different wavelengths. They're no longer visible to you. They can no longer enter your energy field as and when they please. They can't find you. You're gone. You're somewhere else. Maybe you'll encounter each other somewhere on land one day. And the word flame reminds us of fire. Fire burns everything that no longer serves us. That's what we use fire for. We use fire to burn away, and we use fire for passion, to transmute energy. We need fire. And so I honor this journey. I honor the twin flame journey. I honor what I once allowed to be referred to as a false twin flame. I honor the karmic. I honor the soulmate. I honor them all because I honor myself and my highest version. Sending you love. If you're interested in a personal reading from me, I've left my details below in the description box.